So I don't get it, man. So there are case managers that will keep a list. I want to know how you get on the list to not get more halfway house time. Help me understand that.
Yeah, we had case managers that literally kept a list, and they had no problem showing you said list if you bothered them. And it's a fine line you have to walk between advocating for yourself and then not being somebody that annoys them. So if you annoyed them, if you got on their bad side, i.e. bugged them too much or didn't read the room correctly and get out when you needed to, then they'd put you on the list and they'd let you know, like, this list has repercussions, the repercussions that'll affect your halfway house or privileges on the camp or an institution. So best way to never get on it is my advice.
So let's talk about that for a second. So you're in federal prison. The goal when you're in federal prison is to try to get out of federal prison as quickly as possible. And there are good and bad ways to do it. So let's go through, if you'll indulge us, some of the bad ways that prisoners pursued. And as a result of that pursuit, they got on this list that says, if anything, we're going to keep you in here longer. Is it like begging, I want out? Help us understand how you get on that list.
For better or for worse, if you're in prison, I think the worst strategy that you can have to anyone is going in there and complaining. And if you go into a case manager or a counselor or any of the people, any of the staff for that matter, and you start complaining about how bad you have it, I can pretty much guarantee your name's gonna make it to that list. You have to show people that you have a strategy for being there at the prison, doing the best possible job as you can, a strategy for what you're going to do when you're going to get out. And you've got to show them that there's a beginning, middle, and end, that you've learned something, that you've made the most of your time, and that you can tell a good story about who you are and what you're doing and how you're going to be a better person once you're done with this experience.
I think part of it is also reading the room. I remember one time when I was a young stockbroker at Bear Stearns, and most of my clients were baseball players, and I was in New York, and my partner and I were going to meet with a player who was like 0 for 5 with 3 strikeouts. It probably wasn't the best time to review his portfolio after a terrible game. It's like, we'll do it a different day. Isn't there some of that reading the room in prison, that perhaps this isn't the best time to go in and ask your case manager for 12 months in the halfway house?
Absolutely. They're people just like we are. And when they're in a good mood, you're more likely to get some things that you'd like to have versus if they're in a bad mood. I had a strategy often where if I went in and I could tell my counselor or case manager was in a bad mood, I told them, I said, hey, not today. I'll find you another day. And I'd leave, and they liked that. They respected that.
Now, as we talk about strategic steps to get out of federal prison early, one strategic way to get out early is the residential drug abuse program. I know you were sentenced to 24 months in prison. You went to Leavenworth, pretty short sentence, and you were eligible for the program. As I've heard, and I know my partner, Michael Santos, our partner, has traveled to more than 30 prisons, learning, implementing our program. Suffice to say, some staff might not necessarily love on a 24-month sentence, you could be home in 10 months. So could you talk about, even before you go to prison, how someone could make themselves, hate to use the word bulletproof, or try to make it more of a formality that you're going to get in, for example, to the residential drug abuse program? What can someone do before they even go to prison to make themselves a good candidate?
You've got to prepare. Like anything, just like the job, if you're going to rely on your resume to get you just the job, that's not enough. You need to take into account the entire scenario. So you're going into a drug program, or you're trying to get into a drug program. You need to build your resume as to why you should get in there. And you should use all the tools at your disposal. Friends and family, doctors, people that are decision makers that feel this could be a good opportunity for you, or even yourself for that matter. So things that you could do, reach out to your doctors, family physicians, people that are influential in your life, and have them write you a letter, something you can show to the coordinators or staff that are running RDAP, and let them know how serious you are about it. Examples of why you're, specifics, things that'll convince them that this isn't just something you're trying to do to pass the time or to get through a quicker sentence, something that you can prove to them or show to them it's going to make a meaningful impact on your life. And you'll hear me say, I am a big fan of RDAP, and I thought it at the beginning. I absolutely did. But I think it's when are you going to get a chance to look at your life for 9 months to 11 months and take a deep dive into all the things that you've done wrong or haven't, things that you've failed in, or things that you want to succeed in. And you'll get that look with RDAP.
I know there's some case managers and judges who might not love prison reform, and they're focused on the judgment and commitment order, victims, and some have told us, I think it's off-putting that on a 37-month sentence, you could be home in 13 or 14 months. That's not fair to victims. For that reason, they could make it harder or more difficult to get in, which is the reason the person has to advocate. You'd think if you have a recommendation from the judge for RDAP, it helps. If it's in your PSR, it helps. These things should be formalities, but they can make it more difficult. So when Scott mentions getting evidence from a counselor or doctor, so when you go meet with that drug coordinator, that interview, besides just saying, I have a problem, I want help, you have evidence of rehabilitation, evidence that you're taking it seriously. Do you think having that evidence and doing the work helped you get into the program so quickly on a 24-month sentence?
Without a doubt. I mean, I overdid it, but I would incentivize everyone to overdo it. I got a letter from my primary care physician. I went and saw an addiction specialist. I had my family write in letters offering support, telling me they'd like me personally to take the program. I had that all put together in a simple few pages that I walked right into the DAPC. The first couple of days I was there, and knocked on our door, introduced myself, and said, what's going to take to get into the program? And don't stop there. Prisoners are your best advocates also. Go talk to the different people that are in the program. Have them put in a word for you, or at least learn what you can about who does what kind of staff is around, if they're supportive or not supportive. But find the little chinks in the armor that can help you make your way into the program.
So when we talk about strategic steps to get out of federal prison early, you've got to advocate and work and show that you're a candidate to get into this program, and of course avoid problems, because with problems lead to longer stays in federal prison. Part of the reason Scott's now on our team as an RDAP consultant and leader is because he's authentic. He documented the journey every single week. We never ask people to do what our team hasn't done. For example, Scott, I want to put up a quick screen share from one of the weekly newsletters you sent from Leavenworth. And this speaks to the culture of prison, that if one person does something wrong, everyone is held accountable. And I want you to touch on a story that you wrote here. RDAP is in trouble again. We were caught with produce from the garden watermelons, and now we are awaiting further punishment. So now we have to write a 2-page paper on integrity, and we are not allowed in the unit between 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. Talk about, as I just cut you off from the screen, can you touch on, it's one thing to get into the program. It's actually another thing to get 6, 9, or 12 months off of your sentence. Talk about the difficulty of it and the importance of avoiding problems.
Just a quick cool story. The first week I'm in RDAP, and I wasn't in. I mean, I'm in, but mentally I'm sitting there going, this program's not for me. There's this guy there, this huge guy, 6'3", tattoos everywhere, really influential in the camp. You could tell that he had power in terms of people looked up to him, but didn't have a good relationship with any staff or the guards. And I'm sitting there watching him in RDAP, and clearly he's a leader. And he stands up and he says, and I'll never forget this. He said, RDAP changed my life. So here's this guy I got nothing in common with that is clearly a leader in the RDAP unit. And he sits there battling with staff, but the one takeaway he has is that RDAP changed his life. From that moment on, I listened. But one of the things you have to realize about RDAP is you're accountable for your actions, but as well as the whole team or the whole participation group's actions. So yes, we had a crazy farm at Leavenworth where there was everything you can imagine. And people took stuff. They took watermelons, they took corn, they took fruits, and the unit got caught with them. And what happens is the DAPC or the staff will say, okay, does anyone want to take credit for it? At this particular instance, nobody did. And so you get punished as a unit because nobody stepped up and took it. And the punishment was we had to write letters to our parents or to our loved ones and let them know that because of our actions, we'll be staying longer in RDAP. And that's just the reality of it. You're accountable for everyone's actions, but it's not like, I'm not trying to scare people because it's just also part of the program. Like that's some of the stuff they do to make sure that you're committed to your battling your particular addiction.
As we transition, a quick summary. So if your goal is to get into and complete this program, it helps if you disclose your history of substance abuse or alcohol in the probation report. It helps if you've gone to a counselor who can create an assessment, show that you're getting treatment and you're committed to this treatment plan. It helps if your judge recommends it, if your lawyer asks for and you get designated to a prison that has the drug program. One other thing, I want to talk about the subjective nature of federal prison, and that ties in next to release plans. You wrote in one of your newsletters that one dude had been caught with 6 cell phones, and each time was reprimanded, but wasn't designated or sent to a higher security prison. Are you telling me that some guards just didn't care if a guy has a cell phone repeatedly? They just turn the other way from it?
I don't know what it was like with your experience with cell phones, but cell phones were prevalent at Leavenworth. And I saw people that touched a cell phone once. I mean, one time for 1 second, and they got caught and they got sent away. Not only not just sent to the SHU, but went to a different prison, went up in a classification, went to a medium or low. It's crazy. I mean, touched it one time. And then I saw people that carried a cell phone the entire time they were in prison and never once got caught. I think it's a gamble, and I wouldn't do it. But I mean, again, it's not up to me how I tell somebody else to do their time. I mean, one of the things I love about you, and I'd like to know from you, is I saw you, choose who you wanted to spend your time with in prison. And those people you chose are some of them are still good friends, partners of yours today. You know who you need to avoid. And I mean, what did you do to avoid those situations?
I didn't at first. I didn't know any better. So that first night in federal prison, someone gave me a mattress. Huge mistake. That first afternoon walking around that dusty dirt track, I'm walking around with someone who kind of looked like me. I had an indirect connection with. And after 3 hours of walking that track, all I did was hear him blame and excuse his judge, his prosecutor, his lawyer for his plight in life. And I said, my God, I don't want to associate with people like this. I've already done enough complaining. So yes, friendships have to happen organically. You got to lay low. You got to adjust. You got to stay quiet. And so many people form friendships with people where it can lead to trouble. They're associating with someone who has an iPhone. Hold the iPhone for me. Hold the cord, and you feel beholden to them. If they gave you some tuna or roast beef in the commissary, as you adjust. So these are things that people need to look out for, because most people who come into our community didn't have bad intentions. How many people say, I never imagined in a million years I'd become immersed in a government investigation, yet here we are. It's the same people who say, I'll never to get into trouble in prison, yet here we are. It is a subjective process. I knew someone who at Cumberland camp, the guard did not give a rat's ass if prisoners had phones. So that emboldens some prisoners to use it, but another guard may see it differently, which transitions into another strategic way to get out of federal prison early, and the subjective nature of this process, a release plan. For transparency, everyone, Scott surrendered to federal prison with a release plan. It helped him. There are some people who surrendered to federal prison with a release plan where the case managers may say, I didn't ask for this. Get out. They throw it in the trash. So we can't change the past. We can't guarantee what will happen moving forward. Our team encourages you to do the work, and a strategic way to do the work is the value of a release plan. Can you touch on how your case manager responded in a good or bad way when you shared your release plan with them?
Well, it was really interesting because I feel like I saw the birth of release plans in prison while I was incarcerated, because when I first got there with mine, they kind of looked at it, said maybe they put it in my central file, they'll threw it off to the side. By the end of it, they were creating their own version of it and handing it to people. And I personally, I wouldn't want to go with their version. I want to write my own story. So I didn't use those, and I encourage people not to. I encourage people to write their own. But they started seeing the value of it because it helped them do their job better. In a sense, you kind of are. I don't see any downside to doing a release plan. Matter of fact, at the very least, it's going to prep you and keep you in the right mindset for always evaluating how you can shorten your time or be more productive in your current circumstances. The biggest help I got from my release plan was when I got to the halfway house. I had a counselor meet with me. I presented it to him. He literally threw up his hands and was like, this answers 80% of my questions. I'm just going to submit this for your further documentation. I'm going to recommend you immediately for home confinement. And he said, I basically, and in summary, did his job. And so, I mean, but he was grateful. It wasn't a conflict, but I know some guys don't want to see it. And later on, I've seen the same counselors or case managers be shown that same document and say, thank you. So again, like Justin said earlier, read the room, figure out the circumstances, but a release plan is an essential document. It's your path to showing them you're ready to move on.
Scott retained our team in September of 22. I was getting ready to play in this PGA Pro-Am event in Napa, and I was nervous and excited, and we spoke, and you're like, Justin, what if I create this release plan and they don't read it, something akin to that? And I said, Your case manager may or may not read it, but perhaps your federal judge will, or the person in the halfway house who you just mentioned read it and immediately put you in for home confinement, or your probation officer will read it and it will approve you to do work, perhaps working with our team like you're doing now. So for everyone watching, there is a chance you show up with your release plan and they throw it in the trash. There's a chance, as they have done with Scott and others, they read it and say, this is best in class. Thank you for creating it. We can't predict what will happen. We just encourage you to create, to share it, to distribute it. This release plan workbook Michael created, and now it's becoming ubiquitous in the Bureau of Prisons because of Michael's work in touring more than 30 prisons. Everyone will have a release plan, and Scott's point is so profound. Would your plea agreement be more accurate if you wrote it? Hell yes. You wish you could have written it. Would your release plan be more accurate, what you're doing moving forward, how you're going to avoid problems if you wrote it? Hell yes. If not, they're going to write 2 paragraphs. That probably doesn't get you further to your goals. We do have to touch on something before we transition to the last point of maximizing halfway house time, and it's really tied into the release plan. Don't create a release plan unless you're prepared to actually grow it and do work and create. It is a dynamic growing document that should grow as you go through imprisonment. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. There was a bullet, I gave a big first step and I handed it to my counselor, case manager. And then each month or each, profound event that changed, if I got a job, if I started, I lost a bunch of weight, or took some classes, I would give them a little amendment, like an addendum to it and say, hey, I know you already got the central file, or got my release plan. You're all set with that, but here's some additional stuff I'm doing. Just wanted to check in and say hi. I saw some people do some really unique things to bond with their case manager. And like anything in life, sales matter and people liking you matter. And so if the guy's a basketball fan, talk basketball. If the guy's a football fan, talk football. If the guy loves, farming or whatever, might figure out farming and talk to them about it. But making that connection is essential.
I know in our experience of working with thousands of people and going to a lot of sentencing hearings and interviewing judges and other subject matter experts like Chris Maloney, the chief of probation, and John Gustin, who ran halfway houses, I know that it's of very little value to tell them what you are going to do. They need evidence. As a federal judge told me in Texas, if it ain't memorialized and documented, it didn't happen, because they are cynical and skeptical. Let's not forget, after all, we're standing for count on the wrong side of prison boundaries. So if it is not documented, it did not happen, but it does require work. Now, before we go to halfway house, you did that work every single week. It's really a big part of the reason you're on our team, because you're authentic. Can you talk about the value? Even if your case manager threw your release plan in the toilet, Scott, get out. This sucks. I'm never reading it. Have a nice day. Even if they never read it, what was the value to your friends and your family and your awesome father, who every single week coordinated this newsletter that you submitted? What was the value to your reputation and your dignity by choosing to do the work?
It's easy to say. I mean, it's the understatement of the year that quite a few people were disappointed in me when I went to prison. And if it's important to you rebuilding those relationships, like it absolutely should, you're going to need to show them more than just telling them. And so honestly, some of the best advice I got was from you guys, where you said, document it. And I know people, I don't say roll their eyes at it, but they get intimidated by the idea of this. And, you did a blog, and I remember you telling me you were worried, are people going to believe your blog? And they did. People came around and read it. And it's the same thing that happened with my newsletter. It started with 20 or 30 people and ballooned to thousands. And my God, the opportunities that came in terms of people telling me they read my journey, they saw what I was going through, they appreciate the authenticity, they appreciate me talking about the worst and the best. And I rebuilt relationships. Wives of dear friends of mine that were so disappointed in me read my journey and said, now we're rooting for you again. And that, my God, that meant everything to me. And it's essential, because you've got to show people that you learned something from this experience. And I don't care what your journey is. This is an opportunity to make yourself better. If you want to lead, go lead. If you want to play sports and get in shape, go play sports and get in shape. But do something. Don't sit there and say, oh, I'm going to wait till I get out and then I'll fix everything. No, this is the perfect time to start fixing everything.
I'm encouraging all of you, if your goal is to build it, to emerge successfully, to live with dignity, to not have this experience define the rest of your life as it does for so many, you've got to memorialize and document it. People say they can help you. Is there evidence of it? Is there a track record? Have they done it? themselves. There's got to be a level of authenticity there because it shows they did the work and they understand it. It's a big part of the reason you're on our team. Let's wrap up this live video on a Monday talking about halfway house time. The law allows up to 12 full months in the halfway house. Can you offer some strategic steps that someone could put in place to try to maximize their time in the halfway house, besides avoiding disciplinary infractions, doing the bare minimum? Touch on some things someone can do to position themselves properly to try to get as much time in the halfway house as possible.
You're going to need to answer the questions of what you're going to be doing at that halfway house. So preparation, again, turning back to the release plan, but letting this, like you guys like to say stakeholders. It's one of my favorite terms you guys use. Who's going to be needing this information? So case managers, counselors, eventually your probation officer is all going to want to hear what your plan is. So you need to put together a plan and you need to document that plan. You need to say, if you're going to get a job or going to work in an area, show them that you've written letters to those companies and introduced yourself or talked about the potential for you to work with them. If you're going to do extended learning or if you're going to have plans with your family when you get out, you need to show them that you've taken steps to make those things happen. So again, I think 90% of it's preparation, and it's getting the mindset that I can make my situation better. I just need to show them that, and I need to show them that with some documentation in addition to telling them it. There needs to be some things that you can prove to them how you're going to make the most of your time out.
I tell people, if you're going to invest in your own best outcome, you need to invest in the creation of assets. I'm not a proponent of spending big money for consulting, how to shop in the commissary, what toilet you should use, where to masturbate, how to get the best bump shower. We give all of that away for free on YouTube, TikTok, with hopes that it educates you, informs you, but I would not spend money on that. You should spend, whether you can do it on your own or with a team that's capable of helping you. We'd love to help you. You create. I look at things that I've spent money creating. It influences people. So the same way that some of you might come into our community via YouTube or TikTok or media presentation, you are our stakeholder. We want to help you. You too need to begin creating assets for people, for stakeholders that are going to determine when you should get out of prison. It is absolutely vital, because I will tell you, my case manager in prison, her name was Miss Mickleberry. It was right after the Second Chance Act passed. And she wasn't a big talker, but I noticed that she kind of studied what prisoners, how they would spend their days. She knew if you were in the TV room all day. She knew if you were sleeping all day. She knew if someone else did your job, but she didn't care because it's not her job and she's not living there. And I know when I went back for my next team meeting, even though it was 3 minutes, she said, "I'm doubling your halfway house time." I was like, "Thank you." But she could have read my blog. She could see that I did my job. She saw that I associated with Michael and Andrew Alchek and others who were productive and positive. So if you want to strategically advance your release date, you might not have the warm and fuzzies after a 3-minute meeting with your team manager, but if you continue to build and create, it could influence them and reward you down the road. Can you concur? Did you see any of that?
You nailed it. These people, I mean, for the interesting relationships you'll have with some staff, you've got to realize these people watch what you're doing, everything you're doing. And they're going to make decisions based on the things they see. I mean, I saw people that would get completely avoided for pat-down searches because the guards knew they were on emails and reading books all day. I mean, they are going to notice your habits, and, specifically that's their job. So they should. So I completely agree. You're going to make an impression one way or the other, and there's going to be a lot of stuff that they see you do, and that's going to dictate what kind of resources or time advantages you can get.
I will say, as we wrap up, if the goal is to advance your release date and get out of federal prison as quickly as possible, have higher levels of liberty in the halfway house, like working for yourself, volunteering, as many people do for our nonprofit organization, it won't happen by accident. You're going to have to create week over week, month over month, and share it with stakeholders, even if some of those stakeholders throw it in the trash, because it is eventually going to influence people, including your family. Let's close this. I see a little note here from Brent Cassidy, and all of you, by the way, should follow. We've both been on Brent's podcast, which is awesome, Nightmare Success. And Brent wrote, "Scott and I had the same case manager at Leavenworth. The case manager had to use inmates to set up for an event. He asked for volunteers, and I thought it would be a good idea to volunteer." So you want to wrap up just a little bit about Leavenworth and Brent. Thank you for contributing, and everyone watching should follow Brent's podcast. I'll give you the last word.
There are two things I would follow. I would follow Brent's podcast, and I would follow your, Dustin's, TikTok. The stuff that comes out every day, the general advice you learn in just those two instruments is incredible in terms of prepping and getting the right mindset for going into what should be probably the worst experience of your life. But yeah, we had some interesting case managers that were easy to influence, and if you were smart about it. I know a prisoner who actually built a what is it called, the license plate for KU, for Kansas basketball, for their case manager. And you know what? They got 12 months in the halfway house in their home. So, I'm not advocating to do things like that, but I'm advocating to be creative and to get in their mind and find things that are in common.
And that's how we'll close this live video. We're grateful that you've contributed. Scott, again, if you want to strategically advance your release date, knowing there's no guarantee what a case manager will do, we encourage you to think differently and do the work. Sure, you can say you engaged in a program. It's another thing to say how the program helped you. It's one thing to say you read a book, which is a passive activity. It's another thing to share with a case manager, your probation officer, your judge, your friends, your family. It's another thing to share, as Scott did in his weekly newsletter. Why did he read the book? What did he learn from the book? How would the book help him moving forward? And those skills and that work ethic is enabling Scott to succeed on the other side with our team and elsewhere. So be like Scott, create assets and share it. Scott, really grateful you're on our team, and thank you for giving us so much time for this live video on a Monday.
All right. See you, everybody.
Very good.